This video is about the most notable hurricanes beginning from year 1900 to year 2024. In 1900, the most notable hurricane was the Galveston, Texas hurricane, also known as the Great Storm. It is considered the deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history, claiming an estimated 8,000 to 12,000 lives. The hurricane was a Category 4 storm with an estimated 145 miles per hour wind, causing widespread destruction. A 16-foot storm surge inundated Galveston Island. This prompted the construction of the seawall to protect against future flooding. In 1901, the most notable hurricane was the Louisiana hurricane. This storm made landfall near Deerfield Beach, Florida. It is considered the Louisiana hurricane because its path initially followed the Gulf Coast, impacting Louisiana, then hitting the west coast of Florida on August 12 as a Category 3 and winds reaching 90 miles per hour. In 1902, the most notable hurricane was the one that struck Argentina, known as the Great Hurricane of 1902. It is the only recorded major hurricane in the South Atlantic, and the strongest to make landfall in South America south of the equator and also the deadliest in that basin. In 1903, the most notable hurricane was the one that struck Jamaica. The storm made landfall in Jamaica, with winds of 120 miles per hour on August 11, causing significant damage and 65 to 90 deaths were reported. The estimate cost and damage was $10 million. In 1904, the most notable hurricane was the one that struck Cuba, making landfall as a Category 1 on June 13. Winds peaked at 80 miles per hour, causing $100 million in damages. In 1905, the most notable hurricane was the one that struck southwest Vermilion Parish, in Louisiana on September 29. The winds reached 50 miles per hour. In 1906, the most notable hurricane was the one that struck the Gulf Coast, making landfall near Pascagoula, Mississippi on September 27. Significant damage was done and 134 deaths were reported. In 1907, the most notable hurricane was the one that struck North Carolina. This was the only hurricane that season. The 1907 Atlantic hurricane season was a very inactive period. In 1908, the most notable hurricane was the one that struck Leeward Islands. This hurricane was an extremely rare pre-season storm forming in March. It was the only known March hurricane in the Atlantic and reached a Category 2. The hurricane was not widespread, but still caused damage to buildings, tents, and crops. In 1909, the most notable hurricane was the one that struck Velasco, Texas on July 21. The storm was a major hurricane with winds sustained at 115 miles per hour. It caused significant damage and 41 deaths were reported. The damages clocked in around $2 million, destroying most of the town, leaving only 8 buildings standing. In 1910, the most notable hurricane was the one that struck Cuba. It is known as the Cyclone of 5 Days, and was the worst to ever hit, making landfall on the western tip of Cuba. In 1911, the most notable hurricane was the one that hit Charleston, South Carolina, on August 27. It is known as the Duncan Storm. This storm is notable for its unusual path, moving east to west, and its rapid dissipation upon landfall. The storm blew in without any warning. There were 17 fatalities in the area. In 1912, the most notable hurricane was the one that hit Jamaica. The storm made landfall near Negril, resulting in about 100 fatalities and $1.5 million in damages. In 1913, the most notable hurricane was the Great Lakes Storm, also known as the White Hurricane. The storm brought hurricane-force winds and blizzard conditions, creating whiteouts and allowing ice to accumulate on the ships. The storm devastated the Great Lakes Basin on November 7. It remains the deadliest and most destructive disaster to hit the Great Lakes in recorded history. It sank 12 major ships, crippled 30 others, and claimed 250 lives. In 1914, the most notable hurricane was not actually a hurricane at all. It was a single tropical cyclone and was the least active season on record. It developed near the Bahamas at 70 miles per hour and dissipated 4 days later, and no damages were reported. In 1915, the most notable hurricane to hit was in Galveston, Texas. It made landfall as a Category 4 on August 17. Widespread devastation was reported, estimating at $30 million, and claimed 403 lives. In 1916, the most notable hurricane to hit was in Baffin Bay, Texas. The town suffered significant damage in the amount of $1.6 million and claimed 24 lives. In 1917, the most notable hurricane to hit was the Nueva Gerona hurricane. It made landfall at Isle of Pines in Jamaica, with winds at 120 miles per hour, and was a Category 2 on September 23. The banana industry was severely impacted. In 1918, the most notable hurricane to hit was in the Gulf Coast, making landfall near the mouth of the Sabine River. It was a Category 3, causing significant damage around $5 million, resulting in 34 fatalities. In 1919, the most notable hurricane to hit was the Florida Keys hurricane, also known as the Corpus Christi hurricane. It made landfall as a Category 3, bringing wind speeds at 115 miles per hour and a powerful storm surge of 16 feet. The downtown area was decimated, with many buildings pulled into the Gulf. Between 284 and 1,000 lives were taken. In 1920, the most notable hurricane to hit was in Cedar Key, Florida, known as the Great Gale. It caused several damage, flooding lowlands, crop damage, and the electrocution of one person. The storm also sunk the HMS King. In 1921, the most notable hurricane to hit was in Tampa Bay, Florida, known as the Tarpon Springs hurricane, making landfall on October 5. It was a Category 3 and winds clocked in around 115 to 120 miles per hour. The storm surge peaked at 11 feet high, washing away bridges and railroads. Damages were estimated around $10 million and resulted in 8 fatalities. In 1922, the most notable hurricane to hit was in the Yucatan Peninsula, causing severe damage and fatalities. It was a Category 3 and winds were 120 miles per hour. It was the most intense tropical cyclone of the 1922 season. No United States hurricanes were recorded that season. In 1923, the most notable hurricane to hit was on Prince Edward Island, Canada on October 1. It was a Category 3 and was one of the worst storms in the island's history. Winds reached 120 miles per hour. In 1924, the most notable hurricane to hit was in Cuba as a Category 5. It caused severe damage and resulted in 90 fatalities. Winds were sustained at 165 miles per hour. In 1925, the most notable hurricane was not notated. However, there was a tornado outbreak called the Tri-State Tornado. It occurred on March 18, and claimed 695 lives and injuring over 2,000 people throughout Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana. It traveled 219 miles over 3.5 hours, and winds up to 300 miles per hour. In 1926, the most notable hurricane was the Great Miami Hurricane. It made landfall near Miami Beach on September 18. It was a Category 4, causing widespread damage with winds sustained at 140 to 150 miles per hour. A total of 372 fatalities and $150 million in damages. In 1927, the most notable hurricane was the Nova Scotia hurricane. Significant damage occurred, netting $1.7 million, and 173 to 192 fatalities were reported primarily from capsized and missing ships. In 1928, the most notable hurricane was the Okeechobee, Florida hurricane. It made landfall on September 16. The devastating storm caused between 2,000 and 3,000 fatalities. It was a Category 4, causing most damage near Lake Okeechobee, where floodwaters overwhelmed the levees, leading to catastrophic flooding. In 1929, the most notable hurricane was the Great Andros Island hurricane in the Bahamas. The season was very inactive, and this hurricane was the only major hurricane during the season. Significant damage was reported and loss of lives, but the number of fatalities is unknown. In 1930, the most notable hurricane was the Dominican Republic hurricane, also known as the San Zenon hurricane. Approximately 2,000 to 8,000 fatalities occurred and did $50 million in damages. It was a Category 4 and winds clocked in at 155 miles per hour. In 1931, the most notable hurricane was the British Honduras hurricane. It struck Belize City on September 10, and an estimated 2,500 fatalities was reported and was the deadliest hurricane in Belize's history. In 1932, the most notable hurricane was the Santa Cruz del Sur Cuba hurricane. This hurricane devastated much of Cuba, particularly Camagüey province. It caused widespread destruction and 3,144 fatalities. The storm surge was 30 feet tall. In 1933, the most notable hurricane was the Chesapeake Potomac hurricane, also known as the Ocean City hurricane. The storm caused most fatalities of 47 and most damage impacting North Carolina to New Jersey, with a 7-foot surge. The hurricane made landfall in Ocean City, Maryland on August 22, causing $27 million in damages. In 1934, the most notable hurricane was the Central America hurricane known as the El Salvador hurricane. The storm made landfall in British Honduras as a Category 2, taking with it 506 fatalities in June. In 1935, the most notable hurricane was the Labor Day hurricane, making landfall in the Florida Keys on September 2. It was a Category 5, causing widespread damage and claiming 408 fatalities. Most were World War I veterans working on the overseas highway. In 1936, the most notable hurricane was the Mid-Atlantic hurricane, also known as the Outer Banks hurricane. It impacted the East Coast in September. Details about the storm's impacts are not readily available. Its intensity and track caused significant damage and disruption along the East Coast. In 1937, the most notable hurricane was the Great Hong Kong Typhoon. This deadly typhoon struck Hong Kong on September 2, resulting in an estimate of 11,000 to 13,000 fatalities, causing widespread destruction. In 1938, the most notable hurricane was the Great New England Hurricane, also known as the Long Island Express. It made landfall in Long Island on September 21 as a Category 3. It caused widespread damage and resulted in 600 fatalities. In 1939, the most notable hurricane was the Florida hurricane, hitting the state in September. No details are readily available, but significant damage and fatalities were reported. In 1940, the most notable hurricane was the South Carolina hurricane. It made landfall in Georgia on August 11 as a Category 2. It caused significant damage and the loss of life is unknown. The area received record-breaking amounts of rainfall totaling 37.5 inches, and winds sustained between 96 and 110 miles per hour. In 1941, the most notable hurricane was the Texas hurricane, which made landfall near Matagorda Bay, Texas on September 23. It was a Category 3 and several fatalities were reported, but the number is unknown. In 1942, the most notable hurricane was the Matagorda hurricane. It made landfall in the Matagorda Bay, Texas area on August 30. The storm was the most intense and costliest of the season. It was a Category 3, and damages extended as far as San Antonio, Texas. A total of $26.5 million in damages and 8 fatalities were reported. In 1943, the most notable hurricane was the Surprise hurricane. It was named this because it arrived unexpectedly with minimal pre-landfall warning. It was during World War II, and weather information was censored to prevent the enemy from gaining intelligence about the storm's intensity and location. It made landfall on the Bolivar Peninsula in Texas on July 27. Significant damage was caused and 19 fatalities were reported, with winds reaching 132 miles per hour. It was the first hurricane to have aircraft fly into its eye. In 1944, the most notable hurricane was the Great Atlantic Hurricane. The hurricane originated northeast of the Leeward Islands. The storm caused over $100 million in damages along the East Coast. The storm sunk the USS Warrington, having 248 men on board. The minesweeper YMS 409 and the Coast Guard cutters, Bedloe and Jackson, were also lost. There were 390 fatalities reported. In 1945, the most notable hurricane was the Texas hurricane, also known as the Hurricane 5. It made landfall near Seadrift, Texas as a Category 3 and winds clocking in at 115 miles per hour. In 1946, the most notable hurricane was the Florida hurricane, also known as the Tampa Bay hurricane. It made landfall on October 8 and was a Category 1. A total of 5 fatalities were reported and millions of dollars in damages were done to the crops and citrus. The first formally named hurricane was Hurricane George. However, the U.S. Weather Bureau began using the phonetic alphabet in 1950. In 1947, the most notable hurricane was the Fort Lauderdale hurricane, also known as George, struck Fort Lauderdale, Florida in September. It was a Category 4 with winds of 145 miles per hour. A total of 51 fatalities were reported and $160 million in damages. In 1948, the most notable hurricane was the Florida hurricane, also known as Easy. The storm caused $3 million in damages and was indirectly responsible for 2 deaths by electrocution. It was a Category 4 and most destructive in Cedar Key, Florida, where half the houses were destroyed. In 1949, the most notable hurricane was the Florida hurricane, also known as Hurricane 2. It was a Category 4 and 2 fatalities were reported, resulting in $52 million in damages. 1950, the most notable hurricane was Hurricane King. On October 13, it made landfall near Camagüey, Cuba. Winds reached 90 miles per hour and re-strengthened as it moved towards Florida. The winds reached its peak at 130 miles per hour before striking Miami, Florida. It severely destroyed numerous houses and caused widespread flooding. In 1951, the most notable hurricane was Hurricane Charley. It was a powerful Category 4 and struck Jamaica, causing significant damage and a high death toll. In 1952, the most notable hurricane was Hurricane Abel. It made landfall near Beaufort, South Carolina. It was the only hurricane to make landfall that year. Its winds peaked at 100 miles per hour and caused $2.75 million in damages. In 1953, the U.S. Weather Bureau transitioned using the female names. The most notable hurricane was Hurricane Carol. It was the strongest storm of the season, reaching Category 5 intensity. Carol made landfall in Long Island, New York. The storm surge was up to 8 feet and winds were at 160 miles per hour. The name Carol was retired. In 1954, the most notable hurricane was Hazel. It was a powerful storm, making landfall in Haiti, causing significant damage of $281 million. The fatalities were between 400 and 1,000. The name Hazel was retired. In 1955, the most notable hurricane was Diane. It was dubbed the billion-dollar hurricane. Due to its unprecedented damage, it is considered the greatest natural catastrophe in U.S. history at the time. Damages exceeded $1 billion and resulted in over 150 fatalities. The name Diane was retired. In 1956, the most notable hurricane was Betsy. It made landfall in Puerto Rico and winds reached 120 miles per hour. Betsy destroyed 15,000 homes and caused $40 million in damages alone in Puerto Rico. There were 18 fatalities in the French West Indies, 2 from a shipwreck, and 16 in Puerto Rico. Despite the significant impact, Betsy was not a hurricane that had its name retired. In 1957, the most notable hurricane was Audrey. It made landfall between Sabine Pass, Texas and Johnson's Bayou, Louisiana on June 27 at 7 that morning. Winds were sustained at 125 miles per hour. The storm surge was 12 feet, resulting in 416 fatalities. A total of $150 million in damages was reported. The name Audrey was retired. In 1958, the most notable hurricane was Helene. It was a Category 4 and did not make landfall. It came within 10 miles of Cape Fear, North Carolina. It indirectly caused 1 fatality. Wind speeds reached 150 miles per hour and caused $11.65 million in damages. In 1959, the most notable hurricane was Gracie. It made landfall in South Carolina and was a Category 4. Its winds were 140 miles per hour. In 1960, the most notable hurricane was Donna. It was a Category 3 and caused widespread damage in the Lesser Antilles, the Greater Antilles, and along the U.S. coast, particularly in Florida. A total of 5,200 homes were damaged. Fort Myers Beach had 75% and 50% was in the city of Everglades. Extensive crop damage was done to grapefruit, oranges, and near a total destruction of the avocado crops. The name Donna was retired. In 1961, the most notable hurricane was Carla. It made landfall on the Texas coast as a Category 4. The hurricane covered the vast majority of the Gulf of Mexico, from Port Arthur to Brownsville, Texas. The storm surge was 10 feet and caused $325 million in damages and resulted in 43 fatalities. Many injuries were from snake bites due to the flooding. The name Carla was retired. In 1962, the most notable hurricane was the Ash Wednesday storm, also known as the Great Atlantic Storm. This storm occurred along the Atlantic coast on March 5th and lasted until March 9th. The storm's impact extended across 6 states and numerous fatalities, but the number is unknown. In 1963, the most notable hurricane was Flora. It was an exceptionally deadly and destructive storm. Flora made landfall in Haiti and Cuba, causing widespread flooding, landslides, and destruction. 7,193 fatalities occurred. Flora was a Category 4 and winds sustained at 150 miles per hour. The name Flora was retired. In 1964, the most notable hurricane was Cleo. It struck Florida as a Category 4, reaching its peak at 155 miles per hour. Cleo claimed 156 fatalities and did approximately $187 million in damages. The name Cleo was retired. In 1965, the most notable hurricane was Betsy. It was the most destructive and costliest in U.S. history. Damages was at least $1 billion and made landfall in the Florida Keys as a Category 3. Then made a second landfall in Louisiana as a Category 4. There were reports of fatalities, but the number is unknown. The name Betsy was retired. In 1966, the most notable hurricane was Inez. It was a Category 5 and caused significant damage throughout the Caribbean, Florida Keys, and parts of Mexico. The storm caused $222.5 million in damages and resulted in over 1,000 fatalities. The name Inez was retired. In 1967, the most notable hurricane was Beulah. It made landfall near Brownsville, Texas on September 20th as a Category 3. Winds were sustained at 160 miles per hour and produced 117 tornadoes. Over 200,000 people were homeless and over 40 fatalities were reported, and an estimate of $1 billion in damages. The name Beulah was retired. In 1968, the most notable hurricane was Gladys. Winds sustained at 100 miles per hour. It is remembered for its impact on Cuba, wiping out the tobacco crops. It was the first hurricane to be observed by photographs taken by Apollo 7 spaceflight mission, Air Force reconnaissance data, radar, and local weather networks. In 1969, the most notable hurricane was Camille. It made landfall in Mississippi as a Category 5. Winds clocked in at 190 miles per hour and over 200 fatalities were reported. The name Camille was retired. In 1970, the most notable hurricane was Celia, making landfall in South Texas around Port Aransas and Corpus Christi on August 3rd. It was a Category 4 hurricane with winds sustained at 140 miles per hour. A total of $930 million in damages and resulted in 27 fatalities. Corpus Christi suffered the most damage. 85% of structures and 90% of downtown buildings were damaged or destroyed. The name Celia was retired. In 1971, the most notable hurricane was Ginger. It was the second longest lasting hurricane. It lasted 27 days from September 6th to October 3rd. In 1972, the most notable hurricane was Agnes. It was responsible for record-breaking floods in 13 states. It made landfall in Florida. The storm caused $2.1 billion in damages and resulted in 137 fatalities. The name Agnes was retired. In 1973, the most notable hurricane was Brenda, due to its impact particularly in Mexico. It caused widespread flooding, damages, and was followed by an earthquake. It reached a Category 2. In 1974, the most notable hurricane was Fifi. It was a Category 2 and devastated Honduras and other parts of Central America. It claimed between 6,000 and 8,000 fatalities. The name Fifi was retired. In 1975, the most notable hurricane was Eloise. It made landfall near Fort Walton Beach, Florida on September 23. It was a Category 3. The name Eloise was retired. In 1976, the most notable hurricane was Liza. It was one of the deadliest storms in the Pacific Basin, claiming 1,263 fatalities in Mexico. It was a Category 4 and winds of 115 miles per hour. The damages clocked in at $100 million. In 1977, the most notable hurricane was Anita. It was a Category 5 that made landfall in Mexico. It was the only major hurricane that year. Fatalities were reported, but the number is unknown. The name Anita was retired. In 1978, the most notable hurricane was Norman. Winds were sustained at 140 miles per hour and was a Category 4. It made landfall near San Pedro, California. In 1979, the World Meteorological Organization started maintaining the names of hurricanes. It maintains 6 rotating lists, each containing 21 names. If all 21 are used, a supplemental list is used. The names alternate between male and female, and the letters QUXYZ are excluded. In 1979, the most notable hurricane was David. It was a Category 5, striking the Dominican Republic. It caused over 2,000 fatalities and billions of dollars in damages. The name David was retired. In 1980, the most notable hurricane was Allen. It was a Category 5 and the earliest hurricane ever recorded. It caused significant damage in the Caribbean, Mexico, and South Texas. Wind speeds clocked in at 190 miles per hour. The name Allen was retired. In 1981, the most notable hurricane was Norma. It made landfall in Mexico and was a Category 3. A total of $50 million in damages and fatalities was reported, but the number is unknown. In 1982, the most notable hurricane was Debbie. It was a Category 4 and grazed Bermuda. The winds clocked in at 130 miles per hour. In 1983, the most notable hurricane was Alicia. It made landfall in Texas as a Category 3. It caused billions of dollars in damages and claimed 21 fatalities. Alicia's name was retired. In 1984, the most notable hurricane was Diana. It made landfall in southeastern North Carolina as a Category 4. It was a very unusual storm and forecasters had trouble predicting its path. In 1985, the most notable hurricane was Gloria. It was a powerful Cape Verde hurricane, and was the first major storm to affect New York and Long Island directly, since Hurricane Donna in 1960. The name Gloria was retired. In 1986, the most notable hurricane was Charlie. It made landfall in Florida on August 17th and caused $15 million in damages. A total of 5 fatalities resulted from the storm. In 1987, the most notable hurricane was Emily. Winds reached 125 miles per hour and caused $80.3 million in damages to the Dominican Republic and Bermuda. 3 fatalities were reported. In 1988, the most notable hurricane was Gilbert. It was a Category 5 and caused widespread destruction in Jamaica and Mexico. It caused $5.5 billion in damages, and resulted in 318 fatalities, mostly in Mexico. The name Gilbert was retired. In 1989, the most notable hurricane was Hugo. It impacted the Leeward Islands, but most damages were in South Carolina. A total of $11 billion in damages and resulted in 107 fatalities. The name Hugo was retired. In 1990, the most notable hurricane was Diana. The storm caused catastrophic damage in Veracruz and Hidalgo, Mexico. 139 fatalities were reported and roughly $90.7 million in damages. The name Diana was retired. In 1991, the most notable hurricane was Bob. It made landfall in Rhode Island as a Category 2. The storm caused $1.5 billion in damages, mainly in Massachusetts. A total of 17 fatalities were reported. The name Bob was retired. In 1992, the most notable hurricane was Andrew. It was a Category 5 and made landfall near Homestead, Florida on August 24th. Winds sustained at 150 miles per hour. Over 25,000 homes were destroyed and an additional 100,000 were damaged. The damages were $27.3 billion. A total of 65 fatalities were reported. The name Andrew was retired. In 1993, the most notable hurricane was Gert. It made landfall in Mexico and caused $170 million in damages. It resulted in 116 fatalities. In 1994, the most notable hurricane was Florence. It was a November hurricane and passed near Bermuda. It was a Category 2, and winds peaked at 110 miles per hour. A total of 22 direct and 30 indirect fatalities were reported. In 1995, the most notable hurricane was Opal. It was a Category 4, making landfall near Pensacola Beach, Florida. Winds clocked in at 150 miles per hour and 27 fatalities were reported. The name Opal was retired. In 1996, the most notable hurricane was Fran. It made landfall near Cape Fear, North Carolina at a Category 3. A total of estimated damages was over $3 billion. 26 fatalities were reported and 16 inches of rain was received. The name Fran was retired. In 1997, the most notable hurricane was Linda. Winds peaked at 184 miles per hour. It never made landfall but generated large surf in Southern California, leading to rescues. In 1998, the most notable hurricane was Mitch. It caused catastrophic flooding and mudslides in Honduras and Nicaragua. It was a Category 5 and resulted in 11,000 fatalities. The name Mitch was retired. In 1999, the most notable hurricane was Floyd. It was a Category 4, and did the most damage particularly in North Carolina with a total of $6.5 billion in damages. The name Floyd was retired. In 2000, the most notable hurricane was Keith. It made landfall in Mexico and caused extensive damage in Belize. A total of 40 fatalities were reported. The name Keith was retired. In 2001, the most notable hurricane was Allison. It stalled near the Gulf Coast, downgrading it to a tropical storm. A total of $9 billion in damages, and it resulted in 41 fatalities. The name Allison was retired. In 2002, the most notable hurricane was Isidore. It made landfall in the Yucatan Peninsula as a Category 3. It is notable for its large size. A total of 19 fatalities were reported along with 3 indirect fatalities. The name Isidore was retired. In 2003, the most notable hurricane was Isabel. It was a long-lived powerful Cape Verde hurricane, making landfall near Drum Inlet, on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. It was a Category 2 and the damages clocked in over $3.6 billion in damages. A total of 51 deaths were reported. The name Isabel was retired. In 2004, the most notable hurricane was Ivan. It was a Category 5 and lasted 10 days, with winds clocking in at 165 miles per hour. Ivan caused widespread damage in the Bahamas and Florida, before making landfall in Alabama as a Category 3. Total damages were estimated at $42 billion, and resulted in 129 fatalities. In 2005, the most notable hurricane was Katrina. It was the most damaging hurricane in U.S. history, but also the deadliest since 1928. It was a Category 3 hurricane making landfall near the town of Burris, Louisiana. An estimated $100 billion in damages and resulted in over 1,800 fatalities, mostly in Louisiana and Mississippi. The storm devastated New Orleans, Louisiana, with levee failures, causing widespread flooding. The name Katrina was retired. In 2006, the most notable hurricane was Rita. It made landfall in the extreme southeast Texas-Louisiana border. It was a Category 3 and demolished 4,400 homes in the community of Cameron Parish. The total amount cost $18.5 billion. A total of 7 fatalities and 113 indirect fatalities were reported. The name Rita was retired. In 2007, the most notable hurricane was Dean. It was a Category 5 and made landfall on the east coast of Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico on August 21. A total of 32 fatalities occurred across 5 countries: Haiti, Mexico, Jamaica, Dominica, and St. Lucia. The name Dean was retired. In 2008, the most notable hurricane was Ike. It made landfall in Galveston, Texas as a Category 2. The storm caused over $30 billion in damages. A total of 164 fatalities were reported. The name Ike was retired. In 2009, the most notable hurricane was Bill. Winds sustained at 135 miles per hour and was a Category 4. A total of $46.2 million in damages and 2 fatalities were reported. In 2010, the most notable hurricane was Igor. It was a Category 4 and winds peaked at 155 miles per hour. It made landfall in Newfoundland during September. The storm surge was at 4 feet and caused damage to the Causeway Bridge connecting St. George. It caused $200 million in damages. The storm lasted 13 days and resulted in 4 fatalities. The name Igor was retired. In 2011, the most notable hurricane was Irene. It made landfall in North Carolina and caused an estimated $14.2 billion in damages. A total of 49 fatalities were reported. The name Irene was retired. In 2012, the most notable hurricane was Sandy, also known as Super Sandy. It was the largest hurricane on record, spanning 1,150 miles. It impacted the Caribbean, U.S. coast and all the way up to Canada. It made landfall near Brigantine, New Jersey on October 29th. It cost $70 billion in damages. A total of 285 fatalities were reported. The name Sandy was retired. In 2013, the most notable hurricane was Ingrid. It made landfall in Mexico and estimated damages was at $1.5 billion. It was a Category 1. A total of 32 fatalities were reported. The name Ingrid was retired. In 2014, the most notable hurricane was Gonzalo. It was a Category 4 and winds peaked at 145 miles per hour. Significant damage was reported in Bermuda. A total of 6 fatalities were reported. In 2015, the most notable hurricane was Patricia. It was the strongest hurricane on record, with the winds clocking in at 215 miles per hour. It was a Category 5. Patricia did not make landfall, but did significant damage in the coastal areas of Mexico. A total of 6 fatalities were reported. The name Patricia was retired. In 2016, the most notable hurricane was Matthew. It was a Category 5 and winds sustained at 160 miles per hour. It made landfall near McClellanville, South Carolina on October 8. Widespread destruction was done in Haiti and Cuba as well. A total of 585 fatalities were reported. The name Matthew was retired. In 2017, the most notable hurricane was Maria. It made landfall in Puerto Rico as a high-end Category 4. Winds were sustained at 185 miles per hour and maintained for over 35 hours. A total of 2,975 fatalities were reported. The name Maria was retired. In 2018, the most notable hurricane was Michael. It made landfall in the Florida Panhandle as a Category 5 on October 10th. Winds clocked in at 160 miles per hour. A total of 74 fatalities were reported. The name Michael was retired. In 2019, the most notable hurricane was Dorian. It was a powerful Category 5 storm and devastated the Northwest Bahamas. A total of $5.1 billion in damages was done. Winds sustained at 185 miles per hour and resulted in 84 fatalities. The name Dorian was retired. In 2020, the most notable hurricane was Laura. It made landfall in southwestern Louisiana as a Category 4. Winds clocked in at 150 miles per hour. It caused $19 billion in damages. A total of 77 fatalities were reported. The name Laura was retired. In 2021, the most notable hurricane was Ida. It made landfall in Louisiana as a Category 4. Winds were sustained at 150 miles per hour. It did $60 billion in damages and 115 fatalities were reported. The name Ida was retired. In 2022, the most notable hurricane was Ian. It briefly reached a Category 5 intensity, then downsized to a Category 4 before making landfall in Florida. A total of $115 billion in damages and resulted in 161 fatalities were reported. The name Ian was retired. In 2023, the most notable hurricane was Idalia. It made landfall in Florida's Big Bend region. It was a Category 3, and a total of 7 to 12 feet of rainfall flooded Florida. Winds clocked in around 125 miles per hour and the damage total was $3 billion. A total of 4 fatalities were reported. In 2024, the most notable hurricane was Helene. It made landfall in Florida's Big Bend region on September 26. It caused $78.7 billion in damages. A total of 150 fatalities were reported. The name Helene was retired. Here is a list of retired names. For the Central and Eastern North Pacific, there have been a total of 22 names retired. For the Atlantic, a total of 99 names have retired. Next is the alternate name list in the event all 21 names on the current year have been used. I'm including 2 hurricane facts that you probably did not know. The storm name with the most appearances so far is Arlene. It has appeared 11 times as of 2017. Cape Hatteras in North Carolina is the town that has been hit by the most hurricanes and tropical storms with 108 occurrences since 1871. This town is impacted at least every 1 year and 4 months. Let's get those fatality numbers down. Stay weather alerted, follow evacuation orders, observe shelter in place, and avoid dangerous situations like driving and walking through floodwaters. We can't stop a hurricane, but we can stop the fatalities. Don't become a statistic. If you like this content, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to my channel at MeTime806. Thank you very much.